When someone mentions the Lost City of Atlantis, you're probably thinking of an ancient mythical city that was lost at the bottom of the ocean. But what are the chances that it's actually in the Sahara Desert? Well, there just so happens to be a very large round structure called the richat structure spanning 40 kilometers across out in the desert in Mauritania. And scientists can't quite agree on how it got there. Could this be the remnants of the lost city? This is a theory that was put out there by Jimmy Corsetti over on the Bright Insight channel. Of course, I've put a link to his channel in the description. And in this video, I'm going to be looking into his theory and what the science has to say about it. But I do just want to ask though, had you actually heard of this before? Like without the links to Atlantis or anything like that, were you just aware that there was this massive structure that exists in the Sahara Desert? Drop your answers in the comments because personally I had no idea before I saw Jimmy's videos. Now firstly, I just want to delve into the story of the Lost City of Atlantis according to Plato. After all, everything we know about it comes from him, although the actual origins of the story go much further back, which is something I'm going to touch on later on in the video. So Plato described Atlantis in two of his works, Critias and Timaeus, and he describes it as being an empire made up of 10 kingdoms, with the city of Atlantis being its capital. The city was made up of concentric circles with rings of land divided by rings of water. Now in terms of influence, Athens had a stronghold and is still regarded today as one of the most culturally and politically significant civilizations in ancient history. However, the people of Atlantis were fierce rivals to this crown. Plato himself says the invading power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. Now the Pillars of Heracles is the small body of water that separates Europe from the north of Africa, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. And it does seem from Plato's description that Atlantis is indeed in the ocean, and it's thought that the true location is just off the coast of Europe and Africa, where we can see a group of islands today called the Azores. Now this is at least the theory of Randall Carlson, who is a world-renowned geologist and expert in his field, so his word certainly has some weight to it. But remember, there is no real consensus on the actual location, so it's worth considering all possibilities. And looking at the map, we can see that the richat structure isn't actually that far south of the Azores, relatively speaking. So Plato, he's in Greece and he describes the lost city as being beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Is it really too much of a stretch of the imagination to think that he might have been talking about this place down here? In fact, only if we're to take Plato's word extremely literally are we forced to accept that it was actually in the Azores. So let's just for a minute assume that the theory is at least a possibility. What exactly does the richat structure have going in its favour? Well, aside from bearing a striking resemblance to impressions that we have of the city, just in its basic shape, it's also said that the city opened up to the sea to the south. Well, just look at the richat structure. There does seem to be some low-lying land that almost seems to funnel outwards to the south. But it's in the middle of the world's largest hot desert. How could a water-dwelling civilization that was flooded into oblivion possibly be in a desert? Well, Plato puts the catastrophic flood at being around 11,600 years ago. And this is thanks to Jimmy's amazing research, but that timeline coincides very well with what's known as the Younger Dryas impact. This was basically a meteorite that broke up in the Earth's atmosphere and essentially rained down all over the planet, ultimately causing what he calls a climate catastrophe, including mass floods. Also, with all this aside, scientists believe that the Sahara Desert is actually in a constant state of flux, between being this lush green place that's full of life and the arid desert that we see today. And it probably changes around every 20,000 years or so. In fact, the Sahara Desert that we're so familiar with today is only about 5,000 years old. When it was in its most recent green phase, it actually consisted of some of the largest lakes this planet has ever known, as well as some of its largest rivers. So if your objections to this theory are solely based on the fact that the richat structure is in the desert today, then it's definitely something that's worth reconsidering. So I kicked off the video by saying that the origin of this story goes way beyond Plato. In fact, the lost city of Atlantis was originally known to the ancient Egyptians, which I personally find fascinating, and it could support the theory that it was actually an African civilization. In fact, Plato tells us that the empire consisted of much of North Africa and also a large part of Europe. And as I mentioned earlier, he refers to it as the main cultural and political rival of Athens, which makes sense considering the influence an empire of that size would have. So for me then, based on this, it could be possible that the city of Atlantis was in fact situated in the Azores, almost casting an eye on the empire from a distance. But remember, Athens is located in Europe. Atlantis was a kingdom that ruled over parts of Europe and North Africa, and posed a threat in terms of influence. It does seem reasonable to me that the capital could be located somewhere in Africa. Again, it's just a theory that I find quite interesting. There is also some actual concrete evidence that suggests the richat structure was at one stage full of water. For one, looking at the images from Google Maps, we can see what looks like water erosion. In his video, Jimmy actually compares this to what we can see in the Missoula floodplains. Now, the Missoula floods swept across the northwestern coast of America around 15,000 years ago, covering what is now Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And they were so large and catastrophic that we can still see evidence of them today. The theory is that the flood which destroyed Atlantis nearly 12,000 years ago would have been equally as catastrophic, so the evidence of it would remain to this day, and that's what we can see here. Oh, and those massive white areas that are circling the richat structure, well, they're salt deposits. And remember, this thing is 40 kilometers across. So that is a lot of salt. It would seem crazy to me to suggest that the richat structure wasn't in contact with the ocean at some point. Whilst there are a lot of objections to the richat structure being the site that everyone's looking for, I think there are two main ones. Firstly, its size. The richat structure, as I said, is about 40 kilometers in diameter. Now, according to Plato, Atlantis was 127 stadia. This was an ancient measurement that equates to somewhere between 20 to 24 kilometers across. Now, Jimmy suggests that maybe as the story was passed on and translated into different languages, and of course converted from ancient measurements to modern ones, maybe the true figure got lost in translation. Now, there may be something to this, and it is a possibility, because we know how language changes over time, and how the original meaning can be lost. But for me, I do think it is a bit of a stretch, just because from the numbers that we have, the richat structure is literally double the size of Atlantis. Jimmy does make a good point though, in that the empire of Atlantis was massive, and its capital city would likely have needed to be massive as well, just purely to maintain the trade, the commerce, and ultimately the power. So I can definitely see where he's coming from, and I really want to believe it. The second big objection is simply the richat structure's location. It's 250 miles inland and 1,200 miles above sea level, so it really doesn't fit with what we seem to know about Atlantis. Well, I've already mentioned that the continent of Africa once looked very different. Along with the lakes, the rivers, and the trees that once populated the Sahara Desert, there was also the Trans-Saharan Seaway, which would have made Africa look something like this. Alright, it's more to the east rather than to the south, but the point I'm trying to make is that things change over time. Landscapes change, climates change, catastrophic events happen. In fact, if we go back far enough, North Africa used to look like this. And I just can't get my head around how all that salt found its way into the richat structure if it wasn't at some point underwater. So do I believe this one? Well, I hate to sit on the fence, but I'm really undecided. There's so much that seems feasible, and yeah, at points you might have to make small leaps to kind of make certain things work. But as I've said, the Earth is so fluid and constantly changing. And then even if we take what seems to be the solid concrete evidence that this area of land was underwater, does it necessarily mean that it was once the lost city of Atlantis? I mean, maybe it could, but I don't know. One thing I do find astounding though is that I'd never heard of this thing. This massive structure that seems to have been puzzling scientists for decades. You'd think something that large would just be one of those things that's sort of common knowledge, even without any kind of mythology or theory attached to it. It is a great theory though, and one that I want to be confirmed as true so bad. It would just add another chapter to the already rich history of Africa, and would once and for all put this mystery to bed. As I said, a link to Jimmy's video is in the description. Otherwise, you might want to go and see how the richat structure could have actually been in the hands of the richest man who ever lived.